Great, thank you. Next up, we have Jackie Hartnett. Jackie's going to talk to us about Rum Jungle Rehabilitation, incorporation of Indigenous values in rehabilitation design.
Thanks, everyone. My name's Jackie. I work for DITT. I'm the project manager for the Rum Jungle Legacy Mine Rehab job. And I guess I'll just start out with thank yous and acknowledgements. Thank you, of course, to the conference organisers and sponsors for getting everyone together across the world, across Australia. It's a good thing to have. Most importantly for us, I need to acknowledge that the land that I'm going to be talking about today is the land of Kanarakan and Warai people. Acknowledge that obviously their elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge that the topic that Rum Jungle is involves me having to talk briefly about several sacred sites at a high level that are not my business, of course. So I want to acknowledge that I'm talking about the property and culturally important places of other people. I also need to acknowledge that this project really is the work of many people, and I'm just really lucky and privileged to basically present our collective vision, work, and some of those people are even in this room. So I say thank you to them being here. So all I will do today is try and keep this high level. Otherwise, I have a tendency to talk too much about this project because I love it. I just want to go through some brief history and background. What are the impacts of this legacy mine? So just to set some context from a more technical perspective, and then get into some gutsy detail about incorporating Indigenous values into the restoration plan for this legacy mine. Touch briefly on what is that plan and where are we up to right now and what's going to happen next. So as I mentioned before, Warai and Kanarakan peoples are the traditional Aboriginal owners of this site, and there are significant culturally important sites for particularly Kanarakan women in the middle of this property. Those sacred sites are vitally important to those custodians, but I guess for context, this legacy mine site caused substantial disruption to those sites in the 50s and 60s. So when we're talking about sacred sites, it can be quite painful for the custodians to have to engage in conversation about it. And I thank them for having those really tough conversations with us because we're talking about trying to restore them to the best of our ability. Right now, the use of site is basically prevented for TOs and custodians because of the site condition. That's both physical condition related to acid mine drainage, physical safety, and to a far lesser degree, the radiation impact from that site. At this point in time, the land is currently empty Crown land, and it's the outstanding portion of the Finniss River land claim that's yet to be resolved. Essentially what it means, we need to do that rehabilitation work and get it to a suitable standard so that the land claim can be resolved. That's the end goal for all of this work. So we've been working with Commonwealth, our counter agency, industry, science, energy and resources, since about 2009 to develop the design work for that rehabilitation project, and that's now complete. So for context, our beautiful site. So Rum Jungle, former uranium and copper mine, it's located near Bachelor, so it's only about 120 k's away from here, if I remember correctly. It was mined from the 50s to the 70s, starting with uranium as part of the post-World War II, Cold War era rush for uranium for nuclear weapons, essentially, let's be honest. And then up until the 70s for copper and other polymetallics. It was mined prior to ALRA and Sacred Sites Act, but I guess apart from the legislation, it was mined at a time when issues related to Indigenous land ownership and sacred sites weren't taken seriously. That's the way that happened at that point in time, and that's why we have so much pain now to deal with. Early rehab efforts funded by the Commonwealth and delivered by the Territory were completed in the 1980s, and that saw a really substantial improvement in the environmental condition of the river. It was one of the world's first mined land rehabilitation jobs. So back in the 80s, this was literally the world's first cover design, re-veg plan. It was world leading at that time. With a modern lens, it doesn't come up to standard, which is why we're going back to do some more work. That work in the 80s though, reduced the metal loads to the river by around 70% for most of the ecotox metals that were coming from the site. So most of the downstream, all of the downstream environmental impact from the site is driven by acid mine drainage. That's the fundamental problem. Sorry, map, didn't talk about that. Basically, the property that we're talking about is inside the shield. You can see there's a couple of open pits still on the site, waste rock dumps, old scar areas that, the old tailings dam and other production areas that haven't revegetated well are still in poor condition. And you can see the East Finniss confluence in the middle of the site, and then it runs through site and runs down to the main branch of the Finniss River, which reports to Fog Bay. If I talk about this from an environmental perspective first, the impacts are primarily AMD, but the cultural impact to Kanaraka and Warai, and particularly for the sacred site custodians, are substantial. The terrestrial and aquatic impacts right now that you see, acid mine drainage on site, lots of gamba grass infestation, poor soil conditions, poor ecology, lots of fire impact. It's not healthy. There's pockets of land on that country that are still in good condition that we're trying to protect. Everything else, I would call it a gamba grass monoculture, basically. The downstream impacts can be felt, it can be seen and measured up to 20 k's downstream, even today. These are just some pictures for context for people who aren't familiar with the site. The modern pictures here were taken only about 6 weeks ago from the drone. You can see from a landscape visual amenity perspective, the old waste dumps don't blend in, they're very obvious. Lots of bare area that hasn't revegetated well at all. This photo was prior to the 80s rehabilitation work. What you see there is old uranium tailings was essentially disposed over the natural surface, uncontained into the Finniss River when it overtopped. That's the reason why the work in the 80s caused so much improvement, because a lot of that really intense pollution source was cleaned up. Just a couple of extra pictures. You can see in this one here, this is the East Branch Finniss River as it runs through site. The colours tell you it's full of acid mine drainage, essentially. That's what's happening even now. So that's what's still reporting to the East Branch Finniss. The pits, waste dumps, that is as it is at the moment in time. We've got about 10 million cubes of waste rock and material on site that needs to be correctly treated to make it safe, stable, and to reduce or stop as far as possible the off-site pollution coming from this site. In terms of a catchment context, you can see the location of Bachelor on this map, this little, does this have a pointer? Let's try the technology, yep. This is the Rum Jungle project here. The East Branch Finniss joins with the main Finniss at this point, where it's a permanent stream, and runs downstream to Fog Bay. It's about 20 k's downstream. You can still see markers of elevated copper concentration. There's not ecotox at that, it's not toxic at that position, but you can still see the markers of copper concentration at that point. So you can see that this site has a long history from the perspective of sacred site custodians in particular, a history of impact that was not remediated, or the impact was so substantial for those people at that time that still hasn't been restored. The pollution is still running off site. So it's a long history of impact that we're talking about here. So if we understand the physics or the physical condition of what's going on and the processes that are driving that contamination, our challenge was really to meet at the intersection of, although we knew all of the things that were wrong with that site, what did we need to do to incorporate Indigenous values into the rehabilitation plan for that site? There's no point us coming up with a land use plan that doesn't meet the requirements for custodians and traditional owners. So that was basically, we boiled it down to a couple of simple questions. What do sacred site custodians and traditional owners want for the site? What are the most valuable things for us to protect and to try and restore? Because remember, we are going to have to restore landforms into a functional condition for cultural reasons as well as ecological ones. What environmental values do we need to protect? And what do we need to restore? Bearing in mind, environment and culture are inseparable in this perspective. And how do we marry the technical constraints of the physical realities of that site with the needs of custodians and traditional owners to get to the point where we can satisfy the most needs within the constraints that we are dealing with? So we were told years of consultation and engagement to understand what values to protect and restore. We were given, basically, in a condensed version, several priorities. Restore the site and river ecological health, that's priority number 1. And it was a really clear message from custodians and traditional owners that ecological health and spiritual health are inseparable. They are the same thing. Fix the river ecology, that's the priority number 1. The pathway of the East Branch Finniss River, so the physical location to be restored to its original location, because the pathway of the river is the priority for custodians as it relates to the special stories around that sacred site. So we've managed to achieve that in design. Protect the cultural heritage that already exists on site. We have both Aboriginal and Western cultural heritage assets on that site that we need to protect. Protect and restore the sacred sites and respect the custodians' wishes. It was also a strong message about providing opportunity for Kanarakan and Warai to directly participate in the project. And this was around reconnection to that country, opportunity for people, jobs, training pathways, a voice, a direct participation in how we deliver the large-scale remedial works for site. And that was all attached to a message of healing of the country is part of the spiritual and cultural healing that people felt they needed. So impact over the long term needing to be healed, they wanted to be part of that solution. So I need to acknowledge all the time, effort and difficult conversations that Kanarakan and Warai have had to share with us to inform how we plan for the large scale stage 3 job. It's been years of consultation, and also thanks to the Land Council for facilitating that over that period of time. It's been a long journey, but we do have some good news about going forward. I'm not going to go through these because I don't want to take up lots of time reading things. But basically, this just reiterates that final land use, to design the solution, the final land use and functionality has to be strongly influenced by the final land users. There's no point designing Disneyland if Disneyland isn't what people want. So go out, talk and listen. And then try and get the engineers to do that, the fun part. A clear and committed view of project objectives, trying to keep the eye on the prize, focus on ecological recovery and land water functionality. That's what people wanted. That's what people want. Our team of experts, we drew across many disciplines from around the world, some of the best consultants in their field. By taking a really collaborative team approach with technical aspects and then with the values that traditional owners wanted us to include in our design program, that collaborative multidisciplinary approach has come up with basically the best solution that can be delivered for that site. And other things. To give you an idea of the complexity of this job and why mining remediation 101 is really something that's got to get sorted out during operation and not however many years after the horse is bolted. The level of complexity now requires us to basically deal with these packages of work. I'm trying to simplify it here. The main priority though is around acid mine drainage management. That's where a lot of the effort will go, which requires us to construct new waste storage facilities and backfill pit. Key for custodians, realign the East Branch Finniss River back to its correct location, and as well as these ecological rehab. These are more terrestrial ecology rehab processes as well. So it's quite complex: radiation, asbestos, scrap metal, a lot of earth moving, a lot of water treatment, as well as the terrestrial ecology restoration processes. So it's complex now. Would have been a lot easier if it was done properly the first time. I'm not going to dive into this too much, but basically we had to convert what we were told to do, or requested to achieve, from traditional owners and custodians and also the broader community, because this is a project that impacts the whole of Kamali district. Basically, it impacts downstream water users. We have to incorporate the needs of many, many stakeholders into a constructible, deliverable thing to build. So we've taken knowledge from all across other industries, from other miners, from people who are doing similar things around us, and tried to build that into design. So this is just a section, very simple, out of our waste storage facility design package. The points that are on here that are quite unique from a technical perspective is how we've constructed many layers of control around long-term acid mine drainage, so that we can do the best that we possibly can to create an environment where acid mine drainage isn't an issue for the future in terms of how the ecological health of that river will recover. This design element on here is pretty much just showing you a section of the Backfield Pit. We were asked to provide access for custodians to come to the Backfield Pit to be able to access the water for ceremony. So we had to make sure that we incorporated those elements into the design for that. Basically what that means is once the pit is backfilled, how we provide safe and shallow surfaces for people to be able to walk to the water. But the second priority was that's supposed to be a seclusion site for women. So we needed to provide a surface on which we could actually reconstruct, rebuild vegetation systems so that we could enhance the seclusion that was being requested. There's a lot of approvals and plans and other things that we still need to do so that we can actually build this thing. So we've basically finished design, finished planning, finished cost estimating. Now there's other things that we need to do to get in place to be able to build this thing. Key are a couple of AAPA certificates required for some borrow material. The Cultural Heritage Management Plan is a big deal in terms of protecting what cultural heritage exists. The Indigenous Participation Plan really talks about how we're going to get the most traditional owners into jobs and participating with a voice inside delivery of this project. Right now, we are in basically preparation phase for the big stage 3 delivery works. We've just put on 10 Warri-Kanarikan trainees doing conservation land management, and they're starting to assist in delivery of work right now, which is fantastic. So we've got a program to start. It's only about 20 hectares of re-veg over the next 18 months. That's a start to get people in the system of doing bulk re-veg, land management, lots of gamba grass to do, gamba grass work, fire hazard reduction as well. So that's happening now. People are in jobs. They're pretty damn excited. This is our crew photo taken yesterday. So this is only week 6 for our program. And essentially, I'm so impressed with our trainees. They turn up, they're so keen. I've learned so much from them. So this was just showing off our fancy uniforms that we finally got on yesterday. So we're based in Bachelor at the Bachelor Institute on Kanarikan country, and working towards setting up all of these systems. I guess the question that's, for anyone who's followed this project for a long time, the main question has been, when is this job going to get done? And only yesterday in the federal budget, it was announced by the Commonwealth that they're going to do the bulk stage 3 rehab job. Many hundreds of millions of dollars has now been committed by the feds to do this work, which is massive. So we've got to make an agreement on how that's going to happen. And then I'm really happy that we've got 10 trainees already on. Hopefully we can get to 20 and 30 and 40 people in full-time work over 10 years. So that's a big improvement for opportunity for them. So I think that's about it. I wanted to keep this simple. Of course, thanking everybody who's gotten us to this point to be able to even let everyone know that stage 3 major construction work has been approved and can be delivered now. All of our consultants, Canarican and Warrior, of course, everybody on that list has been part of this long journey. Lots of meetings, lots of work, and we say thank you to everybody. It's a big deal for us. That's it. Thanks.